Hey everyone, welcome to UNIQUEWAYS with Thomas Girard, a more than audio podcast. We're here in the Cambie Village podcast recording studio with a really great guest that comes from another guest. So into season 2 now, and super excited to be in this space, approaching summertime now. So today's guest works on art and healing in the hospital environment. That's the main kind of thrust that we have for this, and her name is Mira Malatestinic. Please join me in welcoming her. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. This is awesome.
You ready for 20 questions?
Sure. Before we start, can I ask you a question? These questions are great. How did you come up with them?
It's kind of a long story, but basically I started by being a guest on other people's podcasts, and I was a guest on maybe 6 or 8 other podcasts before I realized that there were some patterns there and there were some key insights that I wanted to incorporate into my questions.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you, because it's from experience.
Yeah. Okay, number 1, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Okay. I think as we said before, it was sort of, I'm always trying to master the dolce far niente, which is the sweet life. Like, so how do we find that great space where we're happy in what we're doing all the time? I am a bit of an art addict. I love art, and I kind of go to a lot of openings. I do some art collecting. As you mentioned, I'm involved with the art committee at VGH. I've sat on several boards. This all stems from, coming from the perspective of a first-generation Canadian. My parents immigrated to Canada years ago, and I grew up here, and that's sort of the lens of my life.
Great. Yeah, I think this all kind of revolves around this idea of place, which we'll get to in a later question. So question 2 is, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
I guess some of my project work, and I could focus on one of the projects that I've done, which is called a box space, art in a box in an alley, where I started by inviting one artist, and then that artist invites another artist, and so on and so on. So we've done about 3 now, and we're just looking forward to the 4th, and it's a specific space that shows art in an alley for the public to come and see and enjoy.
Great. Yeah, I remember, meeting you at the Polygon through Zoran Dragel, who was a previous guest, and he was talking a little bit about the kind of work that you do and why that would be a fit for the show. So I was definitely interested in that. Zoran has been a really great supporter of the show. We did some film work together and did some promotional aspects of the podcast. He's been a real gem.
Oh, he's wonderful.
Yeah.
And he's everywhere.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So question 3, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
Let me just think. I guess it's also because I like the idea of experiencing art in the everyday, in a way that, maybe more in depth than Andy Warhol, maybe more akin to Joseph Beuys, where everybody can enjoy art and be an artist. So I just like to do things that kind of shake things up a little, and this idea started in my garage in the former place I lived, when I would do projections onto the windows, so people passing by in the street could see art as they were in an unusual space. So that's kind of exciting. That's something gets me jazzed.
That's cool. I feel like it's really kind of a curveball that goes in line with other curveballs that are happening in Vancouver. For example, a big supporter of the show is Dr. Garnet Hertz, who's been doing work around zines and around graffiti art and street art culture, and has a great MIT Press book out about DIY culture. But yeah, I love the kind of new ways of looking at things and being exposed to those communities.
Oh, it's great. It makes me think of the graffiti jams that they have around the same time as the mural festival, but it's in the alleys of our streets, and they're unique and different, and somewhere that people are probably hesitant to go into, but they're there. They're in the everyday. We can, it's just a matter of looking, right?
Absolutely. Number 4, we say some people struggle with. The question is, what does your future look like?
I like to think that it's bright and positive, and there's so much to do in the world. There's so much to do in life, and as I said, once you start looking more closely, you start to see more things. So I think that I like to be positive in what are sometimes perceived dark times.
It's interesting, right? Because it is dark times, but then at the same time, we have places like the Polygon Gallery in Vancouver, which is this kind of extraordinary structure to celebrate the kinds of work that we're talking about now. So it's kind of a mishmash.
Oh, exactly. And tonight's this big opening party for the zine show at the VAG.
Right.
Like there's lots of interesting things. Like we can mention 4 or 5 different galleries that have things happening this weekend. It's nice.
Yeah, great. Okay. So question 5, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Let's see now. As I said, I like the idea of somewhere unconventional. And street, like, as you mentioned, like when you're walking along the street sometimes and you see these kind of crazy little guerrilla art pieces on a curb or something like that, that always gets me excited. So it's a matter that you happen to be at that place at that time. And I think in terms of art in a box and alley, it definitely is about kind of a happening. You just happen to, have followed it or heard about it from word of mouth of someone else, and you just get to enjoy it in that moment. I mean, you can find out about it, but part of the joy for me is that you happen upon it. And I like using places or seeing places or space that's used in a different way than you might expect it.
And you were mentioning anyone can do this, basically, right? So is it personal in that way, I guess?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that we're living in a time of indecision and people and some lack of leadership, and absolutely you invite people to do something. If you have a creative idea, do it. Ask for what they say. Don't ask for permission. Ask for forgiveness later. If the intent is good and positive, like, how can it be bad, right? These, as I said earlier, back to the place idea, is I was doing something in my garage before the Miras, and they were just sort of spontaneous. And we had people that would walk by that happened to be in the neighborhood visiting from somewhere else in the world, and they would be a part of it. So I like that idea of that spontaneity, and definitely encouraging people to just do more of that.
The making. So if you had to, where are we here?
We're at 6 now.
6, yeah. If you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
That's a really good question. I really thought about that one, and I kind of went, well, you know what? I have always been, full of energy and interested in the world, but I think as a woman growing up in the time that I did, it's still, there was a lot of feminist movement and things like that, but being brave, I think, is what I would tell myself now, looking back, is just be a little bit braver to go out and step outside that comfort zone.
On the audio podcast, one of the earliest supporters was Debbie Millman, who's kind of a real icon for me, a real kind of mentor person. And we had a big guest agree to be on the show, and literally seconds later, Debbie DM'd me and was like, "I want to be on the show." And that kind of attitude, I think, is a bit of what I can relate to with what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's nice.
What's a day in your life like?
Oh, well, pretty active. I like to aim for being a bit boring, but it doesn't seem to happen. You like a little bit of downtime, but I guess I'm always up and doing something, whether it's a meeting, appointments. I have my dog, who I love and adore, and so Coco takes some time, but it's organizing. When you have a pet, you kind of have to organize if you're doing something else, where she will be. I'm fortunate enough to have my mom around, who's 88, and so I will often be involved with helping to organize some of her things, as in the average day. But then I'm also kind of always on the back burner thinking about some kind of project or something that's going on, and you make time for that where you can. But I think like juggling is kind of a big thing to do in life. So it's which ball has landed today, basically, is what I end up doing.
That makes sense. You know, yeah, definitely gonna pry at that with the work-life balance question. But before we get there, lifelong learning is a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
Socializing.
Yeah.
As I said, we often go to technology. I think, you know, you can't really live without the rectangle anymore in terms of the go-to for some sort of information. But I think that for me, I mean, I will never get away from the human contact, that personal, you know, space where you get the feeling of whether that information you're getting is actually genuine. And you don't really necessarily, you got to do a lot more work to get it from the rectangle.
Yeah, technology. Okay, so tools. What tools do you use? Do you use digital? Do you use analog?
Yeah, you know, both and everything, pretty much, right? As I said, we can't get away from digital today, for sure. And but I love, you know, holding a book, holding paper, having that you know, well resourced kind of information, right? Like when something's published, you know it's gone through a lot of channels, unless it's self-published, right? But we are definitely living in a time where no matter what you're using, you have to be aware of the negatives and the positives of that source or that object you're using.
Definitely. Work-life balance, life-work balance, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the everyday. It's sort of it's a juggle, right? So you see what's a priority, and you know, I don't like to book myself to do too many things because of that, so that you leave, as I always say, I like to leave space so my boat can float. I think that's where magic kind of happens, is when you're not jam-packed and you're not rigid in your appointments or your routine. So you try and incorporate it, but you know, when it comes to health, you kind of want to make sure you've got some routine on a regular basis. So yeah, the things that you juggle are what is the skill, right, of that. So I think it is definitely a juggling thing, especially in today's day and age.
Yeah, we had a really great guest on, Keith Tam, who was in town from Hong Kong and came into the studio to record in person. And he has a very much like a 9-to-5 education administration job, but I do feel like that structure has provided time where he has some downtime and then he has some meetings, but it all kind of plays out in a certain way. It's interesting how that kind of traditional 9-to-5 or the kind of life of an artist alternatively can both lead to some balance.
Oh, absolutely. I think we'll get to that in that other question, because you know, I've done all of those things, but we'll get into that what I wouldn't want to do.
Great. If you weren't doing what you do now, what might you be doing?
I think that if I was to try and fill myself with the creative juices that I try and do in my life, that I would probably be traveling more. So I do some travel, but I think that if I wasn't working on projects in Vancouver and kind of with that focus here, I've taken some projects over to Europe. I've done some small things there, and interacted with Cambodia here through Arts Umbrella, and done a few interesting things like that. So it's all kind of from being locally based. So I think my base would probably shift if I wasn't doing what I'm doing, and do a lot more travel, because that's pretty fulfilling and rewarding and interesting.
Great. What would you not like to do with your career?
Interesting, because for me, it's you know, I've done the 9-to-5, so I'm kind of okay with not doing that. But as you said earlier, like for some people, that's a perfect structure, and I respect people that actually can operate in that structure. Right now, I feel that for me, it's like, yeah, the project work and that being flexible and changing your times around is where I'm comfortable and I enjoy it. And it's not always easy, because doing a 9-to-5 is kind of good, right? You've got your time set, and then you know where your windows are in terms of filling other things. And when you're not doing that, it can be a little bit more you need a little bit more discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're not super disciplined, which at times, you know, you can go be led astray a bit, right? You have to kind of reel yourself in every once in a while.
You know, we had Marion Banshees on the show, and she was talking to her friend, and her friend said, well, why don't you get a job? And she laughed in this kind of bellowing laugh, like, a job? Why would I ever do that? So yeah, definitely have the angles.
Yeah. How would I not work 24/7 instead of, you know, which is what you end up doing a lot of the times when you do a project, right?
Yeah. So favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Further to the discipline question, I think that my favorite, one of the words I have to keep in mind, maybe it's a favorite, but it's one to keep in mind, is focus. Because my mind can go into like 10 different directions, you know, based on a conversation I'm having, because someone said something that's really stimulating, and I said, no, Mira, focus now, right? So focus is a good word.
And a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Back to sentence, I will come back with the favorite one, because it kind of reminds me and grounds me a bit, is also that I remind myself that we all come from a village somewhere. And when someone is maybe not that in tune with where their people come from, their village, then you just maybe need to be a little bit more lax, because you know, some of us are very aware and some of us just need some help to get in touch with that, because I think that's when we can really communicate, right? So yes, the ones I don't like. You know, it's funny because on the podcast I mentioned to you the idea of woke and people saying stuff like do your homework, and it came from actually an experience I had, and that experience was when I was communicating with a person and I asked a question. It was somewhere in the art world, and I was told to go do my homework, and I was really annoyed by that.
I remember that.
Right? And I just kind of went, well, you know, it made me kind of think, well, it's actually not so much about the words, it's about the attitude of not having a respectful dialogue. And, you know, my response was that, especially in the art world, if we can't, you know, challenge ourselves and reach out to do different things and push the envelope in the art world, then we got problems, right? So I think that is something, I don't know if it's a dislike, but I think we should be aware of it and try and not take a pat answer, like just keep pushing it. And in that particular case I did, and it was actually interesting because it was like, we got to a point of conversation.
You know, I feel like every other conversation these days is about AI, right? And in the academic world, when we talk about AI, we often talk about the ethics and the morals of AI. It definitely makes me think of those things. You know, it's one side of it is the humanity, but the other side of it is when these technologies get involved, what happens to those conversations? Oh,
absolutely. I've actually been listening to some stuff recently by well-known professor, psychologists, are talking about narcissism and borderline personality disorders and things like that, that with a huge scholarly reference, as opposed to just it being, you know, the 95% of information that's out there that's not necessarily solid. And it's interesting because he made that comparison of, you know, that actually diagnosed narcissistic character as being similar to where we're going with AI. He says, we're the future, the narcissists are the future, in the sense that that's the lack of emotion, the just data filling of a hole in their being. So it's a very interesting discussion when we come to AI, 100%.
Awesome. You're choosing one word to describe yourself. What word do you choose?
I think I'll still stick with gregarious, right? It's full of energy, always willing to try something and have fun. You gotta have fun.
What keeps you up at night?
Still pretty much nothing. I would say I try not to let things take, you know, I don't like to take things to heart too much. I tend to be serious, and I'm very thoughtful in that sense, that I'm always thinking about something. I find, you know, it's interesting, and that's what creates some very interesting dialogue. But to keep me up at night, no, I'm really lucky to be able to be a very, very good sleeper.
Nice.
If I could make money from that, that would be excellent. I'd be very rich.
Nice. How about a dream you're chasing?
Let's see. I think that, you know, having fun in life and filling my world with love and laughter. You know, I have a friend who's really big in happy faces, and I just always laugh about that because that's kind of like she definitely wants to bring the joy, right? Like I might have a party. Here's the difference between me and this person is that like I'll have a party where I'll say, oh, let's celebrate, you know, healing and healers, and I invite these people and we'll, you know, we'll have a good time. But this other person will just have a Pac-Man party, right? You know, so it's doing it without having to be blatant about it, which I'm very good at being direct. So yeah, pursuing that light kind of wonderful energy that makes us feel good.
You know, we're approaching 200 episodes on the audio podcast. I'm pretty excited about having another summer gathering here in the podcast recording studio. So what inspires you?
I think that, you know, I was thinking about this too, because I've said kids, and I think that is absolutely, definitely what inspires me. Because and then I was thinking, well, why kids? Why do kids, you know, why do I find kids so inspiring? And I thought, well, it's because most of the time, especially if kids are not around their parents, they're genuine, right? And I think that's something that we, you know, that's a society should be craving for. We want that genuine interaction. So kids a lot of times don't necessarily have the filters that we're socialized to put up. So you get a real response, which actually usually, again, always leads to an interesting dialogue, makes you think about things a little bit differently. So yeah, it can be more than children. So genuine, you know, dialogue, I guess, is sort of a really inspiring thing.
Great. 19, advice you'd like to share?
Okay, as I kind of said, well, I don't know what I have to offer, but you know, I think that, you know, follow your energy, be a little bit more. I would say genuinely, if people listen to their intuition more, I think we'd have a better dialogue and better societies, because we would actually be kind of questioning and going with that intuition. I think right now we're so inundated, as we said, with technology, with AI, with all these things, that we're losing touch with our intuitive nature. So I'd go with that one. Be intuitive, go for it.
Great. And finally, number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you? What's our call to action?
Okay, well, if you want to know more about Art in a Box in an Alley, which I also think is great if you just want to do something spontaneous yourself, just go for it. But if you want to do that, then follow what's happening on the next installation of that. You can follow on Instagram, which is boxspace _ Art in a Box in an Alley. And I would also recommend you take a look at Paul de Guzman's YouTube. He does the what is it? Paul de Guzman Presents Art, and he did do a one on Art in a Box in an Alley when we did My Name is Scott. So and his work is interesting too. So I recommend you take a look at that.
Awesome. Well, you know, it's so awesome to have you on the show today. You know, Zoran is, as we both know, he's kind of everywhere all the time, and he's seeing everything. So getting a recommendation from him really actually means a lot for me, and I'm excited to see where Art in a Box goes too. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Thomas. It's been great.
Great. Thanks.